the American League Championship. I don't believe it. It just continues. My, oh my.
High fly ball into right field. She is gone.
Oh, drives one. Right field. Did he do it? He did. Are you kidding me? Let's go.
The FSS Plus Podcast Future Star Series Program 15 with Joe Doyle and producer Casey Bell, and I'm Jason Churchill. Hey, the League Championship Series are well underway. We have a lot of off-season questions to tackle, including one thing that I keep thinking about, guys. What the hell are the Padres going to do? We're going to get to that. Where he might fit in Juan Soto. Does he fit on that roster anymore? Are they going to move him? And if they move him, what could the Padres net in return? One other thing I want to discuss, the offseason goals of the Twins and the Braves. So while the Rangers and the Astros and the Phillies and the D-backs are battling it out for a World Series trip, what in the world are these teams that just got ousted going to do this winter? And I feel like there are a few clubs that are kind of in, purgatory, so to speak. They may be at like a proverbial crossroads in terms of the direction they may decide to go this winter. We'll dive into that as well. Before we do, Joe, one thing I want to do, are you at all at odds with the playoff format? Do you watch this and just go, man, I don't like the 5 game, then a 7, or I don't like the days off? That's been a big complaint on social media these days. Yeah, the top 2 teams, the seeds, they had to sit out, and that's why the Braves and the Dodgers lost. That's why are you in that camp? Or are you kind of like shrug, I don't care, like this, like I need more evidence?
No, I'm glad you brought this up.
You are?
I am.
Right,
Yeah, I talked about this a little bit earlier this week. I think it's outrageous that as an industry, we sit around and teams sit around, managers, general managers, front offices, we sit around all summer, 6 months, 162 games, 174 calendar days, or whatever it is. We talk about how important it is to get the number 1 seed, to get that bye, to automatically get to the division series. And then when you're the team that gets that bye and you get booted because you play like shit, pardon my French, suddenly we need to change the format. I mean, we watched this all year. We all pointed to the roster deficiencies of the Baltimore Orioles. We all pointed to the lack of starting pitching from the Los Angeles Dodgers. These teams won a lot of games, but they were by no means like impervious or unflawed. So I actually think the teams that are in right now, with maybe the exception of the Diamondbacks, I think they more so just got hot. I think the 3 of the 4 teams that are in the championship series right now are the best rosters equipped for these actual games to get this far. So I have no issue with it whatsoever. In terms of the amount of games, no issue with it whatsoever. But the first round bye thing, like the irony and the outrage over it by fans, I think is so dumb. Why do teams that win 102 or 104 or 101 games have this like luxury, this like they're entitled, like an entitlement to play in the championship series? That's so stupid to me.
Yeah. One of the things that I would combat that argument with too is like the Dodgers and the Braves are really good examples. Now they're the freshest ones. And we've talked about you mentioned, Joe, the fact that Dodgers, their starting pitching kind of fell apart. They just didn't really have those horses to go to at the top of the rotation like they had in past years. And even though they won 100 plus games or whatever it was, what about the idea that the Braves and the Dodgers ran away with their divisions? They knew they were winning the division weeks out. They knew there were postseason teams weeks and weeks out. They really weren't challenged to the end. The Rangers, the Astros challenged to the end. The Twins, not so much, but they didn't clinch a berth 3 weeks or a month out, right? Like maybe that also had something to do. I think there are a lot of factors here. And to be honest with you, I don't really know what you can do about it. I don't really, even if you wanted to change it and stop this, what do they generally get? 5 days off? You play Sunday and then you may not play till Friday or Saturday. I'm not sure what can be done about it.
I mean, I think it was 2020. It has to have been 2020. They gave teams the ability to select who they wanted, or like you could do reseeding, or you could have the top teams select which opponent they want to play. I think that's all incredibly cliche. baseball is a marathon. It's one of the pieces of it that makes it romantic. It's the last man standing. It's Survivor in a lot of ways. If you can't show up, if you're the best team on paper, if you can't show up for 5 games and prove that you're the best team, then you don't deserve to move on. And honestly, what's the point? I take it back to the 90s and baseball and early 2000s. Baseball is more fun today because of parity. Baseball is more fun because the Arizona Diamondbacks are in the NLCS. Nobody really loved and enjoyed when it was chalk that the Yankees were going to be in the ALCS or, name your team. If that was the case, it would just be a payroll driven league, which it really hasn't been for the better part of a decade. So I like the parity. I think, does it make games in September a little less important for teams that have won 100 games? Sure. But it's a marathon. You got to show up.
I think the one thing that I have a little bit of a gripe about, and I think they can do something about this, but it's going to take some doing, and that's not having games for 2 days in a row at all. Once the postseason comes and you have, like, I believe on Friday the 13th and Saturday the 14th, there were no games, and that was because the previous series were swept. And I just wonder if down the road the league can't try some sort of flex scheduling. Like, if you dispose of your opponent in short fashion, that should be to your advantage, not your disadvantage. And I think generally clubs would think anything more than 2, maybe 3 days off can be a disadvantage. And I think as long as there's a travel day allowed, the game should not see more than a day without games. Like, you could eliminate that second day without any games at all by having more, flexible schedules. I think venue availability is generally seen as the issue here, but that wouldn't have been the case this year. And I didn't look to last year, but this year that would not have been an issue. They could have just simply started the next series a little bit sooner than they had scheduled. And I know they sell tickets and all that stuff, but we know that they can handle this because we don't know going into a 7-game series there's going to be a game 5. And yet as soon as we know there's going to be a game 5, they put those tickets on sale, or they go ahead and sell those tickets and then give refunds when they don't happen. We know they can do this. That's the only gripe that I have.
I suppose my question would be, what's the goal though? Like, is the goal to eliminate big gaps? I think because it's baseball.
That's
fair. Yeah. I thought you were saying, like, how do we make it easier on the team that won more games? How do we make it more comfortable for the team that won more games?
Yeah, I don't know that there's anything you can do about that.
I don't think there's anything you should do about that.
Yeah, I would think that teams just start to plan better for that in terms of, hey, if we're going to be off for 5 days because we're not playing in the wild card series, we need to play full bore through that last Sunday of the season, which is better for baseball, that they're playing hard, they're trying to win, they're getting guys their innings because they're not going to play for 5 days. Yeah, I don't think
it really points to going out and acquiring starting pitching at the trade deadline. I mean, even if it's just to eat innings in September, I think there's a lot of value in that. We can talk about whether or not, giving up a truckload of players and financial commitments to Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander was a good idea down the road, but you got to have the horses. And that's one thing the Dodgers just didn't do. And, Lance Lynn, great. It's worth a shot. He ate up some innings, but the fact that they were forced to pitch him in game 3, I mean, they just never had the horses. Anyways, I'm going off on a tangent. I as a whole, I don't have too many issues with the playoff structure.
Yeah. There's very little wiggle room. It really seems like I want Major League Baseball to take advantage of the limelight because they don't have it very often. And on a Friday night, especially a Friday night in October, they have an opportunity. There's not a bunch of college football games on that night. There's no NFL games that night, right? Like, that is an opportunity missed because there were no games. And I don't know. I don't know if there's anything they can do. I think maybe there is. I'd like to see him try. Anyway. All right. Juan Soto. It's 1 year left until he hits free agency. He's a Scott Boras client. We all know that. So the likelihood he signs an extension with anyone aren't great. They're certainly not zero, Joe. I think that's the misnomer out there, is that Scott Boras clients don't sign extensions. I think they do if they meet whatever that market value is, or at least what Scott Boras thinks that market value is, because it's happened before. Carlos Gonzalez is the first one I remember going back. Gonzalez staying with Colorado way back when on an extension rather than hitting free agency. But Juan Soto, what's he going to make? Over $30 million. I think it's $33 million projection on his final year of arbitration. You look at that San Diego Padres roster, and if you look at it from a pure statistical standpoint, The pitching was pretty good. The bullpen was terrible. The starting rotation was pretty good. The offense was okay, with Juan Soto having a good year. The question is, it's layered, I think. Do you keep Juan Soto? If you keep Juan Soto, what does that do to the rest of your roster? What does that do to the flexibility? We don't really know because we don't know what the payroll limits are in San Diego. So the biggest thing for me is, if they're going to put Juan Soto on the market, who goes after him? Who should go after him? What can San Diego get in return? Because if you're San Diego, you're trying to get better. And while shedding that $33 million, that projected $33 million will have an impact on what you can do this winter and moving forward, the players you get back in return should be an enormous part of this and the biggest part of this. And there are not a lot of teams out there, Joe, that are going to be willing to take on $30+ million for 1 year of Juan Soto. The one team I keep going back to, I think I've mentioned on the show before, if I'm the New York Yankees, I'm diving in head first on this. I don't know if there's another, maybe the Mets. It depends on what the Mets want to do. It's still a lot of clubs where we just don't know which direction they're going to go. Do the Yankees continue to go down the road of, we're trying to be smarter with payroll, or do they just go, screw it, we won more when we just spent a bunch of money and went after it? But I don't know who else out there other than the Yankees. And maybe you say the Yankees don't make a lot of sense, but like, who else out there makes sense? 1 year of Juan Soto at $33 million. Who's going to give up what it's going to take to grab Juan Soto from the Padres?
I'm with you. I think the Yankees are a prime team to go after him. Now, my hesitation with the Yankees is money. I don't know what direction this organization is going financially. They jump over the collective bargaining tax just this year. It's the first time they've done it in a few years, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's the first time they've jumped over the collective bargaining tax for the first time in a while. Do they want to continue jumping up those percentage penalties? I don't know. They've really dialed back the spending, and I don't know if they're going to continue to do that. I've got 6 teams that I came up with as we were prepping for this. I think the Cubs make a ton of sense. It's not a terribly demanding left field, as long as you have a good center fielder, and they have Pete Crow Armstrong, who's going to be out there. So I think they should be able to handle that. And they're probably going to lose Cody Bellinger. So they have to make up that offense. Everything points to the Chicago Cubs having payroll flexibility and being in the market to win right now. Cubs make a lot of sense. The Seattle Mariners make a ton of sense. Now, I will say with the Cubs, I don't know if, because they're losing a lot of talent from the big league club, I don't know if they're going to be in a huge rush to trade prospects to go acquire a star like that. The Mariners, on the other hand, have a volume of players that they could trade for Juan Soto. They have big leaguers with control they could trade for Juan Soto. And they obviously have an offensive need. They need left-handed hitting. They need impact. And they need guys who don't strike out. So I think Juan Soto makes a ton of sense in Seattle, more so as a DH, less so as a full-time left fielder. But I think you obviously have to consider the Mariners. I think the Blue Jays make a lot of sense. They're a team that for 1 year, could they spend before Vlad and Bo hit their big check years? Probably. I think that makes some sense. They've got a decent little farm system they can pull from. And my question with Toronto is going to be, who's going to play center field? Because maybe you can get away with Dalton Varsho out there full time, and you can put Juan Soto in left field or DH him anyways. I think the Blue Jays make a lot of sense, especially as that window draws even closer to shutting. The Yankees make a ton of sense. The 2 teams, though, that I have circled, the Boston Red Sox, who I don't think anybody knows what direction they're going to go in. Juan Soto could play left field comfortably at Fenway, I think. The issue is Chaim Bloom was brought in to re-energize that farm system and win and cut payroll. Well, if you bring in Juan Soto, you're beefing up payroll, you're trading prospects, and you're kind of just going back to the Dombrowski sentiment. So I don't know the structure of what that front office and ownership group is going to want Boston to look like moving forward. And finally, I think you have to look at the Texas Rangers. They've shown a willingness to spend a lot of money. They've got the prospects, and they're pretty close to being big league contributors, even though there's nothing like truly like special at the top of their farm system. There's going to be a lot of suitors for 1 year of Juan Soto, and I think it's just going to come down to, and nobody talks about this enough with trades, what prospects the San Diego Padres prefer. And this is all assuming that Juan Soto is the means to an end to cut payroll in San Diego.
Right. Let's talk about this a little bit more from the Padres point of view. Because if I'm the Padres, Joe, I don't just want a bunch of prospects. Now, maybe you can convince me if they were the right prospects with the right timetables at the right value. Maybe you can convince me that's certainly possible. But at first and on the surface, right at the beginning, if I'm talking to the Yankees and the Jays and the Rangers and the Cubs and the Red Sox and teams like that about Juan Soto, I'm thinking about what big leaguer or big leaguers can I get from those teams in return for that's where I'm starting. And if I'm looking at, and I don't know if they have the leverage to do that, but if I'm looking at it from that standpoint, if I'm AJ Preller, first of all, if I'm AJ Preller, please don't fire me yet, but I'm not AJ. I'm not AJ Preller, but if I'm AJ Preller, I'm sitting there going, okay, if I'm trading Juan Soto, I need to get something in return that's going to help me right now. I don't just want a bunch of guys who I have to hope on. And prospects, that's essentially what they are. They're suspects until they're proven players. We all know that at this point. And I'm not saying you can't do a prospect-only package, but if I'm the Padres, I'm going to hold out for a while. I'm going to sit there and go, I'll absorb the $33 million. It's not like Juan Soto doesn't perform. It's not like it's going to cripple me. I'm only trading Juan Soto if the actual trade itself helps me win in 2024. And are there teams out there equipped for that? Because if I'm San Diego, I need Blake Snell as a free agent. I need more starting pitching. Yu Darvish is getting older. What's he, 36, 37 years old? And he's not always healthy. I need more starting pitching. Even if I'm bringing back Blake Snell, I need more starting pitching if I'm in San Diego. I need to clean up that bullpen, obviously. And despite the fact that I have big names in my lineup, Manny Machado, Juan Soto, Fernando Tatis, my offense was 13th best in Major League Baseball last year. It has to be better than that if I'm expecting to go to the postseason. What team or teams can help me do that the most if I'm giving them Juan Soto?
I think a lot of these teams have that piece that the Padres would covet. They get a little bit more athletic. They get a little bit younger. They get cheaper, like Leody Taveras at the Rangers. Come on. Yeah. I mean, he's got 4 or 5 years of control left. He can play both corners, athletic. He seems to be coming into his own. Texas has a little bit of a, surprisingly, a glut of outfield prospects right now. And Wyatt Langford, he's not more than a few months away from being ready.
Right. Evan Carter, Adolis Garcia.
Yeah, those guys aren't going anywhere.
Right.
Yep. The Mariners have Jared Kelenic. I think a change of scenery for him. And he kind of jumped into his own this year. He caught some strides. And I know that the Padres really liked Jared Kelenic coming out of the draft. I don't know if that's changed or not, but I mean, I think that makes some sense. You look at the Cubs like Christopher Morel. I know that he's a bit of a folk hero over there, but he's shown flashes of really good stuff. He's a utility guy. He can move all over the place. Maybe he makes some sense.
And in that instance, Joe, you'd be talking about the Cubs acquiring Soto for a player like Morel, which means the rest of the Cubs offseason, because that's one of my crossroads teams as I think about this. They could cut back because they went for it this past year. They bring in the Stromans and Cody Bellinger and they try to make a go of it, and they had a decent year. They really faded late, which was predicted by Casey Bellin, by the way. He knew that was coming. He saw that was coming. I don't remember that, Casey. I remember he was like, yeah, the Cubs aren't getting in. And that would signify, if you're going after Juan Soto, that we're just going to go in buy mode. We're still in buy mode. Even if Bellinger leaves, we're in buy mode. That would be, I don't know, not surprising necessarily, Joe, because that's exactly what they did a year ago, but I'm not sure they want to go down that road or they want to go younger. So that would tell us, hey, if we're going to be involved in the Juan Soto sweepstakes, the Cubs are buying. Are you kind of like, if you're the Cubs in this situation, are you trying to build on what you just did? Even though you could have Stroman as a free agent, he's got a player option for, I think, $21 million. He could opt out and get multiple years either in Chicago or somewhere else. Cody Bellinger's a free agent as well. That would, are you buying if you're in Chicago? Because Juan Soto would suggest yes.
Well, I'm speaking rationally. I'm speaking from the mind of an owner in Major League Baseball. Why would you be the Chicago Cubs and spend all this money the last 2 years on rentals and not continue to want to add, especially with all of your prospects arriving right now, the prospects that you do have? I just don't see why they would allow themselves to take a step back. Now, is Cody Bellinger going to require 8 years, $200 million? I don't think that's totally out of the question.
I don't either.
Yeah, because of this market. And if Cody's not going to return to Chicago and he's going to go, really try to get a big lunch pail, maybe Juan Soto is how you replace that production. So yeah, I mean, I think there's some teams that have players that are ready, like Chicago, who could make a good run at this.
Do you buy, Joe, that the Mets are going to cool it for the next couple of years? Do you buy that at all?
No.
I don't buy that at all.
No, of course not. I think they're gonna pull some levers to get a little bit more flexible in terms of how young they are and how they deploy a team out there. And David Stearns, he was a master maneuverer. Right. This is good podcast stuff.
Master maneuverer.
Yeah. So he's not gonna just go to New York and spend $1 trillion like what's his face did from the Angels. So anyways,
we're calling Billy Epler. Billy
Epler. I was gonna say Bobby Epler, but I was like, Bobby Epler sounds like a college basketball coach. There's no way I'm thinking of this.
Do we lay that on Epler though? Because they didn't really fire Epler. They just hired Stearns because he was a better guy. Like that was Cohen coming in and saying we need to do this, and this. Spend. That's not really on Epler, right?
Yeah, I think what you're going to see is David Stearns come in with a more consultative approach. Like, hey, this is how you build an organization. This is how you build a team that has won through the minor leagues and kind of, gels and meshes together. So I think they're still going to go balls to the wall with spending, but I think they're going to do it a little bit more pragmatically. So I certainly think they're in the market for Juan Soto, and I think that they acquired some really interesting prospects at the deadline this year that could be used to acquire him.
Yeah, they can't really go quiet and just. I mean, you have Pete Alonso who's going into his walk year. He's 29 years old. You have Francisco Lindor, who's I believe he's 30 in November on a long-term deal. You have Jeff McNeil on a medium-term deal. He's 31. He'll be 32 in April. You have money wrapped up in Starling Marte, Brandon Nimmo. You can't do that. You can't carry those players and go quiet for a few years and not try to win with those guys. I mean, it's Francisco Lindor for crying out loud. I know he's not the MVP, but he's like a top 25 player in Major League Baseball. Brandon Nimmo is a good player. You can't go quiet here in a big market like that with an owner like that. I don't know why that all came out at the deadline when it did, that they told Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, or at least Max Scherzer, that they weren't going to try and win until 2025. I don't know how that came out. I don't know why that was said, if it was said, and if it wasn't said, I don't know why it was lied about, but nobody buys it. I've asked nobody buys it.
No, they may take their foot off the gas pedal. Like they may get the lead foot syndrome out, but there's no way Steve Cohen bought the New York Mets, to a year and a half, 2 years later, turned it into a real estate adventure. Like, come on. Like he's going to try to win every single year.
Right. End of the day, does Juan Soto get traded or does he start the season with the San Diego Padres?
I think he gets traded. I think he's the most logical person to move out of that organization. They said that they're trying to get down closer to the collective bargaining tax, that luxury tax. I just think if there was an easy way to shed all of that weight, it would just be moving that one player. And, it also opens up the opportunity for them to do some adding this winter as well, because they're losing Snell, they're losing Hader. You get rid of Soto and you've got some flexibility.
That's right, Josh Hader. Been hearing a lot of 3 and 4 year deals on him, and it just makes me cringe. Absolutely cringe. Juan Soto. Yeah, I guess I'd probably lean that he gets dealt. I guess I wouldn't be surprised in anything, but I would lean that he gets traded. Had a good year last year, though. Certainly held up his end of the bargain. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about the Twins and the Braves. The Minnesota Twins, we've been kind of grabbing 2 teams a week here and going over what they might do over the offseason. Let's start with the Minnesota Twins. Joe had a really good year from a pitching standpoint. They have some holes to fill. Sonny Gray is a free agent. We think I would imagine you would agree. Offensively, there's some play. I mean, they weren't bad, but there are some things they can do to get better. Oddly enough, they need to make more contact. Need to hit for a little bit more average. They struck out a lot, second most, I think, in Major League Baseball. They do hit the home run. They need a healthier Byron Buxton. Not sure there's a whole lot they can do about that. I wonder if they do something in center field to back them up a little bit more. But generally speaking, if you're the Minnesota Twins this offseason, what are your priorities?
Well, I think if you're the Twins, you got to find pitching, right? I mean, Sonny Gray's probably going to be gone. I think a rather large loss for this team that nobody's talking about is Kenta Maeda is probably gone. I mean, he pitched some important innings, pitched 104 innings for this team, in fact, this year. So you're gonna have to find those innings. They have so much left-handed hitting, so much left-handed power. They got Max Kepler probably coming back on a player option or a mutual option. I think it's a team option, actually. Excuse me, it's a team option.
And it's palatable.
It's 10 million. I would expect them to move a bat in favor of an arm. Like, go move Max Kepler for 3 years of a number 4 type of an arm. Something like that.
And get some probability and get some stability. Is that kind of what you're going for there?
Yep. Yeah. I mean, maybe they line up well with Baltimore. You kind of look at, maybe they could move Max Kepler for Anthony Santander and an arm that fills a hole for Minnesota. So yeah, I mean,
how do they replace Sonny Gray?
Those innings?
Sonny Gray, because Sonny Gray was really good this year, and it doesn't. I mean, at this point, Tyler Mahle. I mean, Tommy John surgery that came out in May.
He's a free agent.
They didn't get anything from him, and that was still one of the better pitching teams in Major League Baseball this year. But without Sonny Gray, that's a pretty major hit. So if you're not bringing back Gray, which they could bring back Sonny Gray, but Gray's 34 years old, might prefer to go somewhere else. How do you replace that? I mean, that could be a really interesting landing spot for a guy like Jordan Montgomery to add a little bit of balance in that rotation. If the Twins are going to spend, but they don't want to spend $200 million on a guy, maybe Jordan Montgomery would be who's been really impressive this year. I know the Yankees want to get in on his free agency as well after trading him to the Cardinals, and one of the most puzzling midseason trades of all time, if you ask me. That was the Harrison Bader deal. Like, the Yankees need pitching, so they trade reliable number 3 starter Jordan Montgomery for a defensive center fielder. Sweet. And here they are trying to go after him again in free agency. But if you're the Twins, I don't know. There's so much unknown there with everyone else I have. Like, is Pablo Lopez going to be that good every year? Can't really count on it, but he's your guy. Like, he's your number 1 guy right now. Have to try and go replace as much of what Sonny Gray gave you as humanly possible. And you mentioned Maeda, who's been valuable to them over the last few years. I'm not sure what else, is out there that's going to be interested in pitching in Minnesota, but they've done pretty well with some guys. Really interested to see what the Twins do this offseason.
Yeah, they're another one of those teams that's going to have to commit to spending some more money. And they just brought in Carlos Correa. They spent $1 million, billion, $1 trillion on the guy, like $32 million a year for 6 years or something like that. Their payroll this year was still only about $125 million. And if I'm looking at this correctly, they've already got $109 million committed to 2024 prior to pre-arb. So they are already right at that $125 million for 2024. They've got $107 million locked up for 2025. So they're kind of at an inflection point, like you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast. They're going to have to decide, are we going to be a $165 million team? Are we going to be a $170 million team? Are we going to try and stretch this out and really kind of own the AL Central for the next 3 or 4 years? Or, do we have to take a step back? Do we have to maybe parse out some of these players that are a little bit more expensive in an effort to go get controllable arms? I think the way that this winter is shaping up with the things that teams need and the weird payroll situations with certain teams, like the Miami Marlins have to add payroll. The Padres have to cut payroll, or so they say. Maybe the Yankees have to cut payroll. The Boston's probably going to spend more money. Seattle has to spend more money. I just think this is going to be a really interesting winter, especially with the new wild card system where there's an additional team where you're going to see, I think we're just bound to see a sport where more big leaguer for big leaguer trades are taking place. And gone are not the days of 3 prospects for a number 3 starter. Like, those are still going to happen, but I think the league is just going to have to adjust to, hey, this is your strength. This is my strength. This is where we have a glut. This is where you have a glut. Let's make a deal. And I think the Twins are perfectly positioned to be one of those teams.
Yeah. It's funny how one guy, because again, they didn't get anything from Tyler Mahle this year. Yeah. One guy potentially being gone in Sonny Gray. Immediately for both of us, we're prioritizing starting pitching for the Twins. It's unbelievable how important that is to a club's stability and their success, and for folks to have confidence in them. If you don't have starting pitching depth, no one's going to buy it. Like, you might do it, but no one's going to buy that you're going to do it, which leads us to the Atlanta Braves, Joe. They were the best team in the regular season for most of the regular season, and they bowed out early. Losing in the LDS and really not playing well at all. They got dominated by the Phillies. And in a short series, anything can happen, including that, getting dominated by a team who, I don't want to say Philly is inferior, in all aspects to the Braves, but the Braves a better roster overall than the Phillies.
Mhm.
But we've talked about this before. Philly's kind of built for this, and Philly has one significant advantage over the Braves. And I imagine this is where you're gonna lead off with the Braves in the offseason. That advantage is at the top of their rotation, where yes, you have Spencer Strider, but then after that, what is Max Fried? Can he match up with Zach Wheeler time in and time out, or Aaron Nola time in and time out? And so far, like, the answer is really no. I don't know where Max Fried is these days in terms of his development, but I could see the Braves doing something significant at the top of the rotation as a result of what we saw late in the season and during the postseason. They kind of need someone else to pitch ahead of Max Fried and either beside or right behind Spencer Strider in that rotation. And if I'm the Braves, that's the direction I'd be looking, Joe.
Yeah, well, I mean, what the hell happened to the Braves? This was a team just 12 months ago where we were saying it's a factory. They just build pitching from the ground up, and twice a year they have a number 2 or a number 3 ready to rock and roll. Well, I mean, the only guy that's really survived in that rotation has been Bryce Elder, who by most accounts was supposed to be a 5, maybe a low 4, a pitch to contact type of guy. Max Fried, I don't know what happened there. I mean, he pitched 77 innings this year. He took a step back towards the end there. He's dealt with injuries. Jared Schuster hasn't been productive by any means. Kyle Wright just went down with an elbow injury. Ian Anderson is nowhere to be found.
Another injury-laden career so far.
Yeah,
Mike Soroka, same thing. Yep.
Sean Newcomb. I mean, Colby Allard. The list is just, it's really long, and they've moved a lot of guys that haven't pitched well either. So,
and we both realize, because Braves fans are out there screaming, we scored 3 runs in our 3 losses to the Phillies. Totally get it. Absolutely, totally get it.
That's overreactions Monday.
But you also gave up 10 runs in game 3 when the series was tied at 1. Like, you needed to pitch significantly better and actually make that a game and give your offense a chance. You didn't. And I realize, offenses can go cold. I don't think either one of us, Joe, would say, yeah, the Braves need to do something different offensively there. We're not sitting here. We haven't brought that up once. It's that starting rotation, despite the fact that they did indeed score just 3 runs in those 3 losses. You have to match up better with your starting rotation. I imagine the Braves are going to agree to some extent. Do the Braves go out? The Braves don't do this, though. That's why the Braves are a model for a lot of clubs that don't want to spend huge in free agency. They make a trade, they sign to an extension. They did that with Sean Murphy behind the plate. They did that with Matt Olson at first base. They extend their young guys, Riley and Albies and Acuna Jr. They extended those guys. They don't have significant long-term free agents signing with them. They do short deals, like Ozuna was 3 or 4 years. I think Eddie Rosario was like a 1+1 or a 2-year deal. They don't do the big, long free agent deals. So I'm curious to see how the Braves handle their rotation and their needs over the offseason. Could they run it back and win the World Series next year? Yes, but I can't imagine they're not going to make some effort to improve in that rotation.
Do they pick up $20 million for it's not Colin McHugh. What's the guy's? Charlie Morton?
They're
both 55 years old.
I would say no. Yeah, they're both in their upper 30s. Morton and McHugh. McHugh, the reliever,
Astros villains.
Starter. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would say no. That doesn't mean they don't bring him back in some capacity, but that to me reminds me of the Teoscar Hernandez question in Seattle. I think I can do better with $20 million. And that doesn't mean that player can't be involved in that, but I think I can do better with $20 million. I don't want to pay that guy $20 million for one season. Be interesting to see what the Braves do. I've seen some really interesting trade scenarios out there that included Max Fried, by the way, that were really interesting. For a younger starter and a position player, that was a really interesting way to go about it. Even though the Braves' strength, on paper is that lineup, strengthening of strength is still strengthened. You're getting better. So
I'd actually like to see him go after Paul Blackburn. I think, mixing up with the Oakland Athletics again would be good. I think Blackburn would certainly appreciate a change of scenery, and I think he could be a low 3, high 4. And, that's a guy that could eat 200 innings in his sleep if you're Atlanta. Listen, they had 7 guys with an OPS over 800. Like, you don't need spot on pitching for 162 games.
Yeah. You need depth, and you do want to be set up to go up against teams like the Phillies, though. You definitely
can figure that out at the trade deadline. You can figure that out as the season goes on. I mean, obviously things fell apart from this year, but you would hope that some of the arms that they have coming up have a little bit more impact. You go out and get some high kind of high risk, high reward arms on the winter market, or maybe some minor league free agents that are really interesting, or you're the Atlanta Braves. You can spend a lot of money too, but I just think Blackburn is the type of guy that, especially with what's happened in that organization toward the end of the year, he would fit really well.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the Twins probably should be aggressive on the starting pitching market, including maybe bringing back Sonny Gray on some sort of a deal. And the Braves, probably more on the trade market, short-term deals. Yeah, interesting. I think that actually matches up with the next conversation here. So let's go ahead and move on. One of the things that I have a lot of fun with is in the off season every year is teams where we don't really know which direction they're going to go. And then we find out sometimes because there was a report, hey, we plan on doing this. And it's like, oh, okay, I guess, the Cubs are doing this, and they could have gone in either direction. And I think one of those teams is the Giants. Now, last year told us, hey, they were trying to go for it. Like they were in on Aaron Judge for $300+ million. They were in on Carlos Correa for huge money, and they didn't get either player, but they're in a different position now. They're changing managers. They're some of their younger players are starting to push their way up to like Kyle Harrison coming up. Their young shortstop is close to the big leagues, close to big league ready, close to getting to a point where he can stay in the big leagues and contribute. It's probably it was the end of the road for Brandon Belt last year. It's probably the end of the road for Brandon Crawford in San Francisco. They have a chance to not just get younger, but kind of retool here for a year. But it could also be a year that they just go out and spend money, because that's what they tried to do last year with essentially the same team, bringing in Haniger and keeping Crawford at shortstop and things like that. So that's one of those teams that I think is kind of in the middle. And if you're the Giants and you're going to move on and you're going to try to get younger and you're going to try to kind of retool, Alex Cobb is going to be a really interesting, in that scenario, would be a really interesting trade target for teams like the Braves or the Twins or really just about anybody. He's a really interesting guy. But the number one team at the top of that list for me, where I don't know which direction they're going to go, and I don't really know which direction they should go, is the St. Louis Cardinals, because you have two all-star quality players there, and first baseman Paul Goldschmidt, who has 1 year left on his deal. You have Nolan Arenado at third base, and you have a bunch of other interesting players like Brendan Donovan and Tommy Edman and Lars Nootbaar and Nolan Gorman. It's not like they're without talent. You have Jordan Walker coming up. Do they really just go, let's try to fix the team in one off season, Joe? Because those like Goldschmidt, I mean, I guess you could try to extend Goldschmidt and it would completely change the conversation. But again, he's 36, 37 years old, showing some signs of potential decline. Is Nolan Arenado at 32, 33 years old, starting to decline a little bit? And he's owed like $95 million over the next 3 years. Or do they try to trade those guys and retool, but keep the Gormans and the Walkers and the Nootbaars? I don't really know which direction makes the most sense, but I think it's really interesting that we could be looking at the Cardinals moving one or both of those players this offseason.
Yeah, no, they're another one of those teams that underperformed this year. It's a lot like the Giants. I thought, the Giants really fizzled down the stretch. I think personally, if I'm the Cardinals, I run it back. I think you got too many players at too many positions that have proven they can perform. Third base, Nolan Arenado. Shortstop, Mason Wynn. By all accounts, should be a pretty solid player, and he should take a step. Second base, Tommy Edman and Nolan Gorman. I mean, you can figure out a way to deploy that makes it work. Paul Goldschmidt, Tyler O'Neill, Lars Nootbaar, Alec Burleson. You have the pieces. I think they do need to get a little bit more athletic in the outfield, specifically in center. They've got to address that, and maybe that's a good landing spot for Kevin Kiermaier. But if I'm the Giants, or if I'm the Cardinals, I take the Giants tact to this offseason. I try and go get 2, maybe even 3. Maybe sign 2 starting pitchers for 2 or 3 year deals. The Alex Cobbs, the DeSclafanis, the guys that get moved every single year, it seems. Maybe Ryan Yarborough is a great fit out there. I would do that, and then I would make one move. I would try and trade for some pitching from this glut of position players that you have control over. You could probably get a decent arm for a Luken Baker or for an Alec Burleson or for a Nolan Gorman if you really wanted to kind of take a little bit more risk on and go after a better arm. But I just don't think the Cardinals are so far away from competing, especially in that division where the Cubs are probably going to take a step back, to not run it back.
The Brewers appear like a team that's going to take a step back too. That was a 92-win team this year, and without Brandon Woodruff, could sell. Yeah, and we talked about this last week. Like moving Corbin Burns should probably be their number one priority this winter. If you're going to be without Woodruff for a good part or all of next year, how likely is it you're going to compete at all? That's really interesting. The Cardinals allowed the third most runs in the National League in 2023. That is not something anyone predicted going into the season, despite the fact that nobody really loved that pitching staff to start the year. Everything just fell apart. One thing that's funny, we'll talk about this as the offseason moves along, but the impact that managers have on a club generally doesn't show up. Generally, not always, sometimes it does. Generally doesn't show up unless two scenarios. One, a manager comes in replacing a guy where it seemed on the surface the talent was significantly better than the results he got, and then the new guy comes in and they perform to that level. Or two, and this is Marmol in St. Louis. He takes over a club that had performed well, and then the performance started to sink a little bit. Now, you can say the talent started to sink a little bit too, but offensively and those everyday guys, I don't know that the talent's got worse there in St. Louis. On the mound, yes, but in that lineup, no, and everything has just gone south under Marmol. And I don't know, like, it's really difficult to evaluate a manager's performance. But when those two scenarios present themselves, I start to question whether that's the guy to lead that team. And I know this has been talked about. There's buzz there that maybe he's not the guy, but it does sound like he's coming back to manage that team. I have to imagine they're going to run it back, like you said, Joe. Keeping Marmol there, I imagine they're not going to tear it down. If they were going to tear it down at all, I imagine they'd start over at manager too. Although there are some scenarios, some scenarios there where it would make the most sense if you're going to tear it down just to have him be the manager if you're going to lose 100 games as well. But you want a development guy in place. So it's going to be really interesting to see what the Cardinals do. You mentioned, Joe, and this is a really interesting part of the free agent crop. Starting pitching, kind of doing what the Giants have done with the Alex Woods and the DeSclafanis and the Alex Cobbs, picking guys up on 2 and 3 year deals, maybe getting a little more out of them than their previous clubs did. Andrew Haney is one who went to the Dodgers and pitched really well. I don't know that there are a lot of those available. I think there's some projects out there, but there's some pretty good number 3 starters out there as well. I just think it's going to end up costing you. I mean, Blake Snell's getting at least 5 years, right? Aaron Nola is getting at least 5 years. Jordan Montgomery's getting at least 5 years. Now, Sonny Gray's probably not going to get 5 years because he's 34 years old. So maybe that's a guy that fits in St. Louis. Sonny Gray to St. Louis on a shorter deal. That would make a lot of sense. But man, that starting staff, and remember, Wainwright's retired too. They don't even have that guy to go to, in the middle or toward the back for some stability. They might be more than 2 guys away. They might be 380 innings a year above average starting pitchers away from competing even in that division. It's going to be really interesting to see how they go about things. The St. Louis Cardinals. Is there a club in the American League, Joe, before we call it an episode, that fits into this area where you're not sure which direction they're going to go, even if you have a feeling in one direction or the other? Because I do, and it's Anaheim. Like, if I'm Anaheim,
I have a different one. Okay.
If I'm the Angels, and yes, I call them Anaheim, they are the Anaheim Angels. They will forever be the Anaheim Angels or the Orange County Angels or whatever you want to call them, but they are not LA. So the Angels, I have no idea what they're going to do. I really don't. I don't know if they're just going to go out and continue to do what Artie Moreno has forced this GM to do, if they're going to back off a little bit, if they're going to field calls for Mike Trout. I have no idea. But I think what they should do is cut bait. I really do think it's cut bait time. There's so little going right in that organization close enough to the big leagues where I'm just completely sold that a Mike Trout, Anthony Rendon led roster can win in the American League West anytime in the next 2 years. I'm cutting bait, and I'm cutting bait now. Who's your team in the American League where they're kind of in the middle and we're not really sure which way they're going to go?
Yeah, for me, it's the White Sox.
It's a good one.
What direction are you going to go? Because all of their heavy contracts, the Yohan Moncada's, the Liam Hendricks, the Tim Andersons, the guys that they paid for have fallen on their face. Mike Clevenger, I think that was a mistake.
The good thing there, though, is those aren't big, long-term elite contracts that are going to hold them down for long periods of time. That is the silver lining with those guys.
That's kind of my point. Is if you so right now they paid $151 million for 2023. They're on the hook for about $153 million after pre-arb. They're already over their skis for 2024. That falls to $94 million in 2025 after.
That's Chicago.
Well, that's my point though. So what if you were to move a few of these pieces? What if you were to try and move Tim Anderson for just something? Just a lottery ticket, something.
Anything to kick the $14 million off the books.
Anything to kick. Well, it's a club option, so you pick it up and then you pick up a double-A shortstop that has something interesting about him,
or you just decline it.
What about Eloy Jimenez? I mean, he's got 3 years left on his deal. Are we sure? Are we sure that the team is going to pick up the 2-year, $40 million, like $37 million that's owed in 25 and 26? I don't know. And you could probably get something pretty decent for him in this free agent class.
I'm sure they should, because even a guy that's been hurt a little bit is worth that. But you're right.
But with
trading
the
that seems to make the most sense.
Yeah, I mean, I look at this organization and I don't know what direction they're going in, and I look at their farm system, and outside of Colson Montgomery, who's going to be really good and he's going to be up this year, I don't know if they have the pieces necessary to take a step in 2024.
Yeah, wasn't Chris Getz the new voice there? I'll say that, because he's essentially replaced Joe, both Ken Williams and Rick Hahn. So he's basically both guys at this point. So he doesn't have anybody between, himself and ownership to answer to. So it's Chris Getz. And to be honest with you, I don't have a feel for that. I don't have a feel for how that's going to go, because if this were Arizona, I'd feel one way. If this were the Dodgers, I'd feel one way. But this is that team that's in the middle. The White Sox are so in the middle, and they shouldn't be. It's really embarrassing. I think they can, if they do it right, I think they can spend their way back into contention really quickly, because it's not really all that unlike the National League Central. The American League Central isn't like the Twins and then everybody else. The Twins are catchable. The Cleveland Guardians competed with the Twins most of the season, despite the fact that they don't spend money on players. And the Cleveland Indians are probably another team where we know they're not going to spend money, but what do they do? And we could talk about the Guardians later in the offseason, but the White Sox right there, smack in the middle, have no idea what they're going to do, but they do have some problems. Lucas Giolito, they traded at the deadline. Ronaldo Lopez, they traded at the deadline. Who's the slugger they sent to Chicago? Drawing a blank. First base, outfield,
Berger.
DH type. Berger, thank you, Jake.
They sent him to Miami, but yeah.
Sent him to Miami, yes, thank you. So they're a team that unloaded a little bit with Jose Abreu going to Houston before the season, to where they don't have that log jam anymore. But it seems like, do they have answers really anywhere except Jimenez in the outfield and a healthy Moncada at third base? It doesn't seem like they do.
I wouldn't even say Moncada as an answer at third base. He's been absolutely terrible the last 2 years, and he's been hurt. And Jimenez keeps getting hurt. I mean,
what do you do there?
This is my point.
Other than rebuild.
This is my point. In a poor free agent class where there's certainly going to be overage spending to pull people into different markets, why not try and move a couple of these guys that won't be on your roster in 2025 and just say, hey, this organization, this roster is not built to compete right now. Now, they've spent 165, 170 million in the past. Spending is not totally unfamiliar to them.
Right.
But I just don't see. I mean, maybe you can go out and get a starting pitcher, but they're in trouble, man. Dylan Cease and Michael Kopech are both slated to come off their books in 2025. And the way that their tenures have gone in Chicago, I'm not sure either one of them is in a huge hurry to sign an extension.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe they can be one of these teams that signs a couple of guys to 3-year deals for 55 mil.
Yeah. And that's been their MO in the past, but that's different.
They're in a weird spot.
Yeah.
They're in a really weird spot.
If the White Sox end up doing a kind of tearing it down, going for a full rebuild, which should be more along the lines of what we just saw from Seattle, where maybe you're bad for a year or two, but there's really no excuse to be terrible for 5 years anymore. There's no excuse for that at all. But if the White Sox do something like that, the two big names we're going to hear about, you mentioned Dylan Cease, their ace, and center fielder Luis Robert, who's coming off a pretty huge season, put up a 5-win season at 145 games. if they're on the trade block this summer, that's going to spice things up quite a bit on the hot stove come, I would imagine, December in those winter meetings, Joe.
Especially Luis Robert in a suffocated free agent market for bats. I would imagine teams are going to pay a premium for a center fielder who can hit 45 homers.
Yeah, there is no the strength of the after starting pitching. The strength of the free agent market is corner outfield bats, but there's no athleticism out there. There's they're left-handed. No shortstop, center field, second base. So if you want to go out and make a trade for one, if Robert's on the market, yeah, there's gonna be a huge market for him if he's out there.
Yeah, I would consider it. I just think the way that organization is set up with contracts and ARB and everything like that, I just, they're going to have to spend and really thread the needle here for the next 3 or 4 years. Or, you could move some of these players now and prime yourself up for 2026. That's probably what I would do.
Oh, to be a fly on the wall.
But I'm a shill.
Chris Getz took that job. That's
but I'm a bootlicker and a shill.
That's the thing. It's like, we don't know what ownership told Chris Getz. We don't know what Chris Getz told ownership. So that's why we're sitting here kind of guessing out loud. Good stuff there. Hey, we'll do another couple of teams next week and go over their off seasons. I think the Brewers would be a good one because we talked about them quite a bit. So let's throw the Brewers in there and let's go ahead and throw the Angels in there and go in more in depth in what we think the Angels will or should do. And we'll do that next week, along with we'll talk World Series next week. These LCSs are going to be over. They're highly competitive at this particular point. As we record this, the Game 4 in the National League is being played, and we just completed Game 5 in Arlington with Rangers and Astros. They've been pretty entertaining, I'd say, and we'll know the World Series matchups when we talk next. So Joe, parting shots this week on the FSS Plus podcast.
Parting shot.
Anything you wanted to say, anything on your mind, because we're not a video podcast yet, you can't see that Joe's name here as we record. He wrote his waste management free advertising, which is pretty funny. Mine says I'm new because somebody called me new on Twitter today, which was hilarious. And Casey says Rangers Suarez to the Rangers, which is just random and awesome at the same time. Parting shot, Joe. Like, have you ever wanted to say something to me you just didn't like, and you want to say it now?
Yeah. How did you get to paying rent in Fedway in the big green monster? How did you get an apartment in there?
How did I get an apartment here? Oh,
yeah. If you guys can't see it right now, but Jason's background is
my background is that
monster
area behind the hand operated scoreboard at Fenway, the Green Monster. Yeah. So they don't tell anyone. They don't know I'm here. I just snuck in, man. I use a VPN. Nobody knows I'm here. I just plug in, got a little light. It's pretty great.
Honestly, Matt, I don't really have a parting shot this week. Like, I'm trying to think of something that really irked me this week, but
that's really what these parting shots should be. What irked you this week?
Yeah, just watching the Rangers, watching the Astros duke it out, literally and figuratively on the television, just bums me out as an AL West regional guy. So, go Phillies, go Paul Sewald. Can't both win, but I just want good playoff baseball.
I think we're seeing that. I think
so now. Yeah.
My parting shot is Casey Bellin needs a better background because he doesn't have one right now. And we need to get super producer of the show, Casey Bellin, to actually get a background. Because at some point we're going to go video on this and people are going to see back there. And you want them to see something cool. Like Joe's got his thing. I don't know what that is. I can't really tell, but it's pretty cool, whatever it is. I got the Fenway thing and I'll change mine every week. Casey, you got nothing, man. You got nothing. What do you have to say for yourself?
Joke's on you. Casey's actually in solitary. So that's why it looks the way it does.
Boy, Casey, man, I'm telling you though, Casey did call the Cubs. He was like about 2 weeks left in the season, 3 weeks left in the season. And Casey slacked and he was like, the Cubs are done, man. Have you seen how they're playing and what they have come? They're done. And they did. They faded. They lost like 3-4 games in the standings and they were done. So, all right. We'll talk next week. This has been the FSS Plus podcast.
So just chill till the next episode.
lane. Getting funky on the mic like a